Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to join us tonight. My name is Kelsey Norman, and I'm a fellow at the Center for the Middle East, as well as the director of the Women's Rights, Human Rights, and Refugees program here at the Baker Institute for Public Policy. It was only 8 months ago that we collectively watched as the United States withdrew from Afghanistan. I'm sure we can all remember, as we watched over the course of several weeks, one of the largest and most rapid humanitarian evacuation missions in history unfold. And as the Taliban reclaimed power, Afghans fled the country, both to neighboring states by foot, as well as via evacuation by the US and its allies. The crisis that Afghanistan has been facing since last August has fallen out of the headlines, replaced by the war in Ukraine and the associated displacement of millions more individuals. But this does not mean that the situation in Afghanistan is any less deserving of our attention. Just last week, the Taliban leadership announced the closure of girls' high schools, mere hours after they reopened for the first time in 7 months. This backtracking by the government means that girls above the 6th grade will not be able to attend school. This unfortunate turn is all too familiar. In its regime prior to 2001, the Taliban severely curtailed women's rights and freedoms, including freedom of movement, banning education for women and girls, and prohibiting women from leaving their homes without a male family escort. While the current Taliban regime has vowed to respect women's rights this time around, it seems clear from the government's actions so far that they intend to return to the same discriminatory restrictions as in the past. To help us understand the challenges for women's rights going forward in Afghanistan, as well as what women are already doing to resist that oppression, we are so honored to welcome Dr. Sima Samar, a renowned Afghan women's and human rights advocate and activist who has worked to help restore the rights of women and to improve their economic, political, legal, and social status in Afghanistan. Dr. Samar has a truly remarkable career trajectory. She is a member of the United Nations Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Mediation and a former member of the UN Secretary General's High-Level Panel on Internal Displacement. She previously served as chairperson of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission and as Minister of Women's Affairs in Afghanistan, and as one of the only 2 women in the transition government at that time. Dr. Samar began her career practicing medicine after graduating from Kabul University Medical College, but she was then forced to flee for her safety, first internally within Afghanistan and then to neighboring Pakistan with her young son. In exile, she worked to provide safety, healthcare, shelter, and education to displaced Afghan children, women, and girls. Upon returning to Afghanistan, Dr. Samar continued to champion women's rights and worked tirelessly to improve their economic, political, legal, and social status, including the right of women government employees to return to their jobs and to keep their seniority after maternity leave, as well as the reentry of girls into schools and legal representation for women. As first chairperson of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, established in 2002 and constitutionalized in 2004, Dr. Samar reported bravely on pressing human rights challenges, including the issues of civilian casualties, the realization of economic and social rights and the status of women, and accountability for human rights violators of the past and present, even leading her to receive death threats from rights violators. She has established the nonprofit Gau Shahad Institute of Higher Education, which offers training in the fields of political science, political sociology, economic planning, leadership and administration, and education and opportunities for women, as well as economically disadvantaged and marginalized students through tuition subsidies and scholarships. Various aspects of Dr. Samar's work have been recognized over the years through several international awards, including the 1994 Ramon Magsaysay Award for Community Leadership, the 2004 Jonathan Mann Award for Global Health and Human Rights, and a nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009. Dr. Samar was also conferred with an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters by Brown University in 2005. Dr. Samar is currently based in the US, having had to flee Afghanistan for a second time. and recently joined Harvard University as a fellow with the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy. We're also joined by Sehba Sarwar, a transnational writer, workshop leader, artist, and community activist tackling gender, displacement, and border issues. Born and raised in Karachi, Pakistan, Ms. Sarwar spent the first half of her life in a home filled with artists, activists, and educators. Before moving to Los Angeles, she was based here in Houston, where she founded and directed a social justice or arts organization, Voices Breaking Boundaries, that addressed border issues through art productions, publications, and workshops. The second edition of her novel, Black Wings, published by Valise Books, was released in spring 2019. And in addition, her essays, fiction, and poems have appeared in publications including the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Houston Chronicle. She has also served as a scholar in residence at Rice University's Center for the Study of Women, Gender, and Sexuality. So, we will first hear remarks by Dr. Samar, followed by a moderated discussion between Dr. Samar and Sehba Sarwar, and then there will be time for audience questions. So now I welcome to the podium Dr. Samar.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity. It's my pleasure to be here and speak to you tonight. It's very difficult to discuss the issues in Afghanistan in 1 hour, but I try to shorten my talks as much as possible and to make understanding what's happening in the country. I touch a little bit on the length of war in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been at war for 44 years. And it's begun with unfortunately, with the coup d'etat by the pro-USSR people in 1978, and then by the Russian invasion in 1979. I'm mentioning this because I see and I feel the pain of the people in Ukraine. In my personal view, it's just repetition of the Afghan history again in another country. After the Russian invasion in Afghanistan, then of course the US, it was Cold War time, and other Western countries, including some Arab countries, unfortunately, start to support and choose the most conservative people and non-educated people, train them, equip them, fund them, in order to stop the advancement of the USSR in that region. And I think choosing that kind of a group just was the first mistake in my personal view, because it prepared the environment for such a conservative, terrorist, fundamentalist group. And people who are aggressive, people who are violent, people who use religion in order to control the population, and people who is against equality. And that is very, very important issue. And if they are against equality and they discriminate the people, then they start, of course, the conflict, and the conflict will continue. The other point that was really very, very unfortunate for Afghanistan was ignoring the education for Afghan refugees because of the Russian invasion and because of their arbitrary arrest and a lot of violation of human rights, including putting restriction on their basic rights, such as freedom of expression and freedom of media, and all the other freedom that the people, even the simple freedom of exercising the religious activities that they wanted to do in the country. Ignoring education, I think, was one of the unfortunate mistake in Afghanistan, because I think in a country, if you want to destroy a nation and destroy a country, you take some actions. One is the discrimination. You put half of the population, discrimination against women, you put half of the population inferior situation, and that itself creates discrimination in the family, and that kind of inequality from home comes to the society and comes to the school, to an all field, including comes to the leadership, political leadership in the country. So they try to use that kind of discrimination or inferior position of women in every part of society, social, economic, and political section of the society. We saw it in Afghanistan. I give you just an example. We had an elimination of violence against women law, and we couldn't pass through the parliament because of this kind of attitude, because of this kind of behavior. The second point that as I said, that to ignore education. Of course, it's very easy to control uneducated people and to misuse them. That's why we have this Taliban who claim that they are Muslim and they are implementing Islamic law, which is not true. They don't know how to pray themselves. They say that, okay, I'm Taliban, but I don't know how to read Quran. And he's the one who is trying to implement the Islamic law on the other people and control the people. In Afghanistan, ignoring the education system. Particularly in Pakistan, unfortunately, we had more than 6 million refugees, and the children was taken from their family and trained in those religious schools, brainwashed on those religious schools. They never saw their mother. They never saw the feeling and the love within the family, particularly by their mothers and sisters. So they came up out of the madrasas, and they think that women are the problem, and they are the one who cause all the corruption in the society. That's why they try to control half of the population. The third point that we saw, ignoring the principle of human rights in Afghanistan. Nobody was talking about human rights, because if you don't believe on equality, if you promote discrimination, then there is no human rights, because you already ignore the equal dignity for every human being, for every citizen. So these three main issues really put us in a very difficult situation. That's why when you see all the peace process in Afghanistan, it's always done by men. And the first one was the Geneva Accord in 1988, which was signed by Pakistan and Afghanistan. And then the US and the Russian were the witness, so-called. Well, no women were involved. And nobody talked about human rights and respect for human dignity in the country. Of course, it ended up with the withdrawal of the Russian in 1989. And then we had the pro-Russian or pro-USSR government resisted for 3 years. And then the government failed on 1992. And then that was the time when the USSR was also start to collapse. And then for the Western countries, including the US, Afghanistan was not important because they achieved their goal, which was the USSR in the destruction of, let's say, USSR and the kind of freedom of those different countries from USSR. And we see one of the results today, unfortunately, that still they want to keep that kind of control on those countries, which was part of the USSR on that time. Ukraine is a live example. Then Afghanistan had a turn to be a playground for the people who were terrorists from all over, including Bangladesh. My sister is sitting here from Bangladesh, including from Bangladesh, Pakistan, you name it, from India, from any other Muslim countries all over. It was very interesting because I went to Khartoum, and then I saw some, before that actually, I saw a group of women on a conference, Women in Development Conference, and they said that the jihadi the Afghan brothers, the Sudanese who fought in Afghanistan, they were calling them Afghan brothers because they were wearing the Afghan dress. And they were the one who stopped the university lecturer and told her that she is not dressing properly. So it was kind of, Afghanistan become a place that everybody could come and be trained over there. And also Afghanistan became the biggest producer of opium, unfortunately, because at the beginning the people were thinking, okay, let them produce and they will buy a weapon and fight against the USSR. But nobody thought that it will be reaching their home somehow, and it is producing drug, in my personal view, is a really a big crime, because you destroy the human dignity with that, making them addict. And we have millions of them in Afghanistan, unfortunately. In Afghanistan, nobody was interested. Even the US left the Afghan program. Even the NGOs who were working on humanitarian sector, they closed down their offices. And then the tension between the different ethnic groups in Afghanistan started, unfortunately. Of course, women were again forgotten. And all the peace process in Islamabad or in Rawalpindi was done by men and decided by men, so no women. And they were saying that, which kind of a Muslim you're talking about women's rights? Then we had Taliban, and Taliban, we all know that as soon as Taliban took over any part of the country, or in Kandahar they started, the first thing was the closure of schools for the boys, for the girls. And then women were not allowed to work. They were only allowed to work on health sector, which was, it was not a lot of female doctors and nurses, but they were allowed to work in nothing. I mean, their movement was restricted. And even the families who had the double-story houses, they asked to paint their windows, not to be seen by, music was not allowed, television was not allowed, photograph was not allowed. Children were not allowed to play with the kite, to run a kite, because they were saying it looks like a bird and you're competing with the creation of live things. And then, of course, the attack in the Kenya and Tanzania embassies of the US, then Afghanistan was hit by missiles, and Sudan was also. But then what? The people who were giving information to, let's say, CIA or to the US government, the same people were giving information to Al-Qaeda and bin Laden in Afghanistan. So when they attacked with 85 missiles that night in Afghanistan, bin Laden was not there. So the leadership of Al-Qaeda was not there, and the few young junior boys, some from Bangladesh, some from Afghanistan and Pakistan, was killed. So it was, unfortunately, it was then 9/11, of course. I had a meeting here in Washington with the Afghanistan desk officer. I told him that Afghanistan became a training camp. It will hit you someday. And also it's the biggest producer of opium. And also Afghanistan became the biggest prison for women in the country. And imagine what was his reaction. He said, I don't believe on the training camp, that Afghanistan became a training camp. Opium from Afghanistan is not coming to US. We get our cocaine from Colombia. And women's issue in Afghanistan is your culture. We do not want to interfere. We respect your culture, we respect the religion in Afghanistan, so we don't have to fight for women's rights in Afghanistan. Recently, Khalilzad's wife was saying that the US doesn't have any obligation to fight for women's rights in the country. I think we all have an obligation to fight for human rights. So hopefully women are counted as a human. Anyway, and we had after the intervention of the international community leading by the US, there was some achievement on human rights and women's rights in the country. Women were back in the politics. We had women in the politics. We had women in business, we had women as a journalist, we had women, you name it, in sports, and they had small companies on home-based production up to construction company. They were doctors, they were judges, they were prosecutors, they were in police, they were in army, because I was the one who was pushing for women's participation in all those, particularly in the security forces, because as a member of the United Nations, we have all these a nice resolution, women, peace and security, and then what? Is it important in Afghanistan or not? Or Afghans are special country, so we should not touch it. And unfortunately, after Taliban came for second time, and I think all those achievements is not saved. I mean, the whole peace process with Khalilzad signing with the Taliban and ignoring the Afghan government, although I am here to say that the Afghan government was not the best government. It was a lot of corruption, nepotism, a lot of issues in the government. But at least there was maybe 1 million people went to vote out of 35 million, or out of, let's say, 10 million people who got the right to, or was in the age to vote. But that peace accord really emboldened Taliban, and they were not really there to accept anything. And then after the peace, it was 4 points actually. One was to the withdrawal of the US should be planned, and the second was the Taliban should not allow any terrorist group to use Afghanistan territory against the US and their NATO alliance. The third was that it should be Afghan talks between the Afghans, and the fourth was a ceasefire. So after the sign of the agreement, they pushed the Afghan government to release 5,000 Taliban from jail. Fresh fighters for the Taliban. So the others didn't come. I mean, it was the Afghan government, of course, it was delayed, and the president should have been in a position to manage the whole peace process, but he couldn't, and he was unfortunately, very much self-oriented and trying to protect himself and his position rather than really managing the peace process in the country. There was a delegation from Afghan government side which went in Doha, and they never sat seriously to discuss the issues. And then we end up with the 15th of August. Usually Taliban became in power in September 1994 in Kandahar, and then September 1995 they took Herat, and then September 1996 they took Kabul. So September was this time, after 20 years of all of us fighting against Taliban, they came in August, earlier than their usual month. And 15 August they took Afghanistan, and everything was almost gone. Quickly they shut down the Ministry of Women's Affairs, which was one of the good outcome of Bonn Agreement, which was in 2001 in Germany after the attack on 9/11. The establishment of the Ministry of Women's Affairs, it's not because I was the first minister, it was because it was really acknowledgement of women existence in the country. And the other thing was the establishment of Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission was part of the Bonn Agreement, and both is closed down. So there's no mechanism for the monitoring of the human rights, and particularly monitoring of any violence against women. So after this new structure, after the first Taliban government fall, we were able to promote equality, including, for the first time in our history, there was equal rights for men and women, we add the word woman in the Constitution. It was a lot of resistance. Everybody was saying that when we say not citizen, it's atba. I think people from Middle East understand that the followers are equal, but we are not all followers. So we were insisting that it should be women and men. And first time we had a law, elimination of violence against women. We criminalized the domestic violence against women in the country. And then we established a special prosecutor at the Attorney General Office for Elimination of Violence Against Women. This law was enforced in 2009 by the presidential decree, but because of few conservative persons in the parliament, we were not able to pass the law by the parliament, even if it was passed by the parliament. So currently Afghanistan is the only country without constitution, is the only country that put officially ban on girls' education. They don't know how to govern. They took the country by force, but they don't know how to govern the country, and they don't have any plan for governance. Every week there is new order on women. They should not go to park, they should not go to school. I mean, they keep the people waiting for this 22nd of March for the girls' school to be open again for high school. The primary school is open, but a lot of people are afraid to send their daughters. The last point with Taliban, I would like to say, is that Taliban taking over Afghanistan is emboldened all the other fundamentalists, including the Pakistani Taliban, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, ISIS, all of them are, and also emboldened the patriarchy. Now the male member of the family is trying to restrict the freedom and rights of the female member of the family under the name of protection. You're not safe. You have to wear this. You have to be doing this. You have to be accompanied by someone because you will be beaten up by the vice and virtue police. And I stop here. And thank you very much for this opportunity. Are we doing this? Mike. Okay, put it on this one then. Sorry, this card.
Complications. Thank you so much. Is that on?
Yes.
I just want to say, Sima, that was just a short but such an important recap, and I just want to give another round of applause. Everything that you said, I think everybody in this room, it resonates with all of us. And I mean, when we say Afghanistan, I think in the world, we all feel the grief. People like us, people who are here today, are here for the grief, to grieve with you. So just know that. And before we talk about what you talked about, anything else, I just want to ask you about how you and your family have been impacted this time around. Feel free to share whatever you feel comfortable with, because you are in exile again.
Yes, I think I've been internally displaced during the Russian and Afghanistan. And then I was a refugee in Pakistan for 17 years. I lived in Quetta for 17 years, and I watched I saw everything, the growing of Taliban and those madrasas in the country. And I fought with all the regimes in the last 44 years for human rights. This time I came in June to see my family because I have family here. I have my granddaughter, yes, is here, Sophia, and my daughter-in-law is sitting here. Because of the COVID, I was not able to travel, so I came, and I didn't have an official job, so I came for 6 weeks. And my return ticket was on 10th of August. And I was prepared, my bags were packed, and I bought all the multivitamins that I need for myself and for my other member of the family. And then it was called for. I have brothers also here. My brothers and the family in Kabul were saying, please postpone, the situation is not good. And I was surprised because I knew that it was a problem, but I was not expecting such a quick and sudden fall of the government and escape of the president. So I was forced to stay here. And this was really difficult in its third time. And I have to say that somehow I was lucky because I was here, I came, I flew Turkish Airlines. Somebody bought me a business class ticket, so it was not really a bad evacuation, I would say. But then the first day they went to my house, and then they searched our house several times. They pushed out my family in order to take the house. I mean, they took the car. I had a vehicle, an armored vehicle, which was not from the government. It was given by the French embassy personally to me because of my protection, and they brought it for their soldiers, but they didn't took it back to France. So they were giving to some so-called human rights activists. So they gave me one. They took the car. They gave really hard time to my family member who was there, and my mother, who was 93-year-old. They had to leave the house for at least for one night, and then I had to call some different people, including President Karzai. So next morning, a different group came several times to take the house. The final one was people from the north, Uzbek people. Yeah, it is. I still don't understand where I am because I'm traveling in this country from 1989 onward, at least twice a year, or 3 times a year, or 4 times a year to the US. I never thought that I am going to be here and looking for legal status or trying to find a job to survive because everything is there. So, but I'm still, I would say that I'm one of lucky ones compared to the other people's and the suffering of the other people.
Yes.
It's beyond words, I think. It's very difficult to explain what people see every day and what people go through every day. You can see the level of desperation when you sell your 4-year-old daughter or 6-year-old daughter in order to feed the rest of the family. So the humanitarian crisis, the governance crisis, the economic crisis, because we had drought and we had the COVID also, it had a negative impact to everyone, but including on us, was terrible, terrible situation. And then for women, they are punished because they're born women. And it's not Islam, because Islam started with Iqra. People who are from Middle East, they understand Iqra means read, and they are choosing. One of them yesterday put in it is in fact the education minister who said that women are not allowed to get education. No way, no way. We don't care what the international community say. This is the law that the Islamic law, and we are implementing. They misuse Islam, of course.
They misuse Islam.
And unfortunately, I think, as I said, that it's emboldened their brothers in Pakistan.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. And it has been fed by Pakistan.
Exactly.
These are cross-border relations that have been very treacherous and that have damaged not just Afghanistan, but now the world.
Yeah, I keep saying that we cannot choose our neighbors, unfortunately.
No.
So we, in Pakistan, we are neighbors, and we don't have the choice to choose the new neighbor. But can we live together? Why not? Why the other people are able to live together with different language, with different culture, although we are very close on everything. But we use the blame game, not only between Pakistan and Afghanistan, but we use the blame game with the other international community. Everybody is saying the Afghans are not united and they've never been governed. We had a government before. When I was young, I gone to co-education school almost 60 years ago. And now girls cannot go to school.
So, I think you have said this before about we cannot choose our neighbors, and you also made a very important comment when you were talking over there, where you said that there have been all these peace talks and there have been all these discussions, but women have never been at the table. So are the peace talks now, and then in another talk that you gave back in 2013, you had said that you had hope that because the youth are being educated, they're seeing a new pathway, which was the pathway before. It was there in the 70s, it was there in the 60s. It's not like this is something new, what happened after the democracy was reinstated in the 2000s. You said you had hope in the youth. So I wanted to ask you, where is that hope today when there is so much change between?
Yeah, I think I still have a lot of hope on the youth. Because sometimes when I'm too depressed, because with the establishment of the Ministry of Women's Affairs and also the establishment of the Human Rights Commission, working on human rights is very, very difficult job, even in democratic countries, let alone in Afghanistan or countries like Afghanistan. But to see how everything is closed down and abolished, and the staff of the Human Rights Commission is really scattered everywhere, and they're still in the country and under a lot of pressure. But when I see the youth and the girls who are going out in the street and complaining, they make videos and put on the WhatsApp and Facebook and Twitters. These are the resistance by the educated one. And as I believe that as much as there's more pressure on youth, there'll be resistance. Although I'm not in favor of again using gun in order to change the environment, but it should be, and it will be resistance, because sometimes I saw the graduation ceremony of the small university that I have. I was surprised because the boys and girls were in the same uniform, and they were together celebrating their graduation, although it was much less than the previous years. They had music, but this time without music. But they were I should have brought some of the photos, but I didn't. I missed it, actually.
That's beautiful.
So
and you saw through YouTube videos that they were uploading people. How are you keeping in touch? How are you?
No, they are
these
sending with the email. I mean, thanks to technology also.
Yes.
Because during the first Taliban regime, we had only one television and no telephone. It was
no
only
Wi-Fi.
few Pakistani line was given to Kandahar because the Taliban headquarters, and then later on in Kabul. But now we have few companies. The mobile phone is in every house, spying somehow on the situation and also spreading the information, which is good, actually.
It is good.
Yeah.
So that is how you're getting most of your information that way.
Email and also WhatsApp.
That's great. So, and that gives you hope. Yes.
Yes, I think they cannot take the knowledge from the youth about their rights and about the importance of education. But the economy is really, really bad. People cannot afford to send their children to schools.
So what is a viable option? I mean, who is the peace talk, if there is to be a peace talk, if there is to be a resolution to what is happening? Is it an overthrow of this government? What is the next step? What can happen? What do you foresee as something that could happen that would change the direction of where Afghanistan is today?
Well, I think it should be a dialogue. And one of the things that we did not take it seriously was accountability and justice for commission of international crimes such as war crimes and crimes against humanity. It should be a dialogue, most probably a political dialogue. It's really needed to support people who are in need for survival, that humanitarian relief, but that is not the solution. The solution should be a political solution. First, I think it should be a inclusive government, because currently with Taliban it's very exclusive. It's mainly one ethnic group.
Pashtun.
Yes, and it's only one mentality, so it doesn't matter if you are different ethnic group with one mentality. That's also very dictatorship and very much against the rights of the people. So I think it should be a dialogue and inclusive transitional government, and then that transitional government should prepare the environment for election. Because when we had election in 2004 and 2005 particularly, some of the Taliban leadership stand for parliament.
That's right.
They didn't win the election. That's why they are afraid from, they keep saying that the people likes them and support them. If the people like you and support you, why are you afraid? From election, from inclusion of people and participation of people in the peace process, in the political process. I mean, legitimacy is not coming by gun.
No.
Legitimacy should come by people's trust on the government. It should be a responsive government. They're not responsive to any need of the people.
But this, we hope, is temporary, yes?
I think as much as they put more restriction on people, they will...
More resistance.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the nature.
Right.
I think that's physics.
Right. That is physics. So, and you know, human interest is fickle also, right? Because right now, when, you know, last summer, and then in August, when Afghanistan was the focus, and all international media, cameras, everything was focused on Kabul airport, what's happening, what is this exodus that is happening. Everybody knew this is what is happening in Afghanistan. Today, when you turn on the television, you open the newspaper, there is no news. It is dominated by what is happening in Ukraine, which is of course connected, it's a mirror of what happened in Afghanistan. But what would you want to say to people today about that?
Well, I think that the wound in Afghanistan is quite deep. And we like it or not, it will bother everyone. We saw it, so we should not really let the history to repeat itself. And the problem will not stay in Afghanistan. It requires attention. I'm not saying that we should not put attention to Ukraine. That was one of the mistakes during the 2003 when they announced, the US government announced that Afghanistan is a success story. They went to Iraq. So now, unfortunately, same. Somehow we also have a little bad luck, I would say. But watching the suffering of the people and the destruction in Ukraine, it's not only the physical destruction, the building destruction, the road destruction can be built, but the destruction and separation and the trauma that the people get and face is very difficult to treat it quickly. So I think we need to of course pay attention to Ukraine, But we should not forget about Afghanistan. And the truth is that we should not allow the history to repeat.
That's beautiful. That's so wise. And when you use the word wound, I hear you talk about wound, and I hear you talk about anemia that is happening, that what is happening in Afghanistan, and that wound is so deep, and it cannot stay, and it is not confined by borders.
Exactly.
It is an international wound at this point. What has happened in Afghanistan then affects all of us. So what would you want people here today to know and do? What action can we take? We are sitting in this room, we all care, everybody is here because we care. What can we do?
Well, I think one is that advocate for human rights in Afghanistan. Advocate for justice in Afghanistan. If there was a just accountability and justice in Afghanistan for war crimes and crimes against humanity, I think the other countries would have been in much better situation. We all know that our governments might not be able to deal with the war crimes and crimes against humanity, and they, as it is on the ICC, either they're not willing, of course not, because they're part of the government, and they're not able. So we need to support the international mechanism for provision of justice. I mean, watching and accepting the commission of war crimes and crimes against humanity is fueling the culture of impunity. And we see it everywhere, not only in Afghanistan, in other countries also. So that is one thing that the advocacy should be continued on keeping Afghanistan in agenda, in human rights in agenda. The second point is that if the woman suffers in Afghanistan, I don't think we should ignore and close our eyes that it is Afghan problem. It's not Afghan problem. It's a human problem. And we, as a human, we have an obligation to deal with that.
Absolutely.
Again, I insist on justice, but I think that the third point that I would say that we should support education in all level and all possible means and ways. If it's homeschool, if it's school under the tree, if it's in the mosque, wherever. And they cannot stop, even if it's online, but they cannot stop if there's a political will to do that. And that's the only solution, I think, in order to change the mentality and facilitate the sustainable peace and development in Afghanistan. We have all these nice SDGs, MDGs, and SDGs goals, but we cannot forget Afghanistan. We are part of the human body.
And what you say is so true. Women's rights are human rights.
Yeah,
it
exactly.
Is very profound what you say. We have time for a few questions from the audience. If you have anything to say, I mean, Sima has so much more to add, but if you have any specific questions, you can walk up to the mic. There's mics on both sides. And we'd love to hear from you. Somebody's up.
Yeah. Hello?
Ji.
You hear?
Yes.
Ah, okay. Thank you. The question is not really just facing Afghanistan. I too come from Middle East, though 60 years ago. I came here the first year John F. Kennedy was president. But the problem of the Middle East is nothing new. And I think most of it began with the death of John F. Kennedy and LBJ, the new president, within a matter of weeks, started waging a war in Yemen, killing. And Americans have been doing that ever since. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Sudan. I mean, look at the children in Yemen.
Do you have a question for Dr.
Yeah, the question is why the women is this big issue at this time. It's actually the entire countries and the society that have been traumatized by America's invasion one after the other. Unless some people really prevent these oligarchy in Washington to stop their wars, otherwise we're going to continue to have the destruction in the Middle East. So I want to have your opinion.
I think I already answered your question, but I will still say something. I think if the violation of human rights of women in a family is happened, then the violation of human rights continues, because the truth. I mean, the Taliban, for example, saying that the women are not complete human being. How can they be complete if they're born of their mothers? So it's really start from the family. I'm not saying that we should watch the violation of men or killing of men in the country. That's why we are standing for all the human rights. But why women should be punished because they're born as a woman? We as a Muslim, we believe that every human being born with equal dignity. It is in Quran. So who we are to fix the mistake of the God, let's say, put it this way. We believe that we are created by same God.
Heaven lies under your mother's feet.
Yes.
Correct. Yes.
You spoke about the, well, it is an excellent presentation, thank you. You spoke about the relationship with one of your neighbors, with Pakistan. How would, given all your experience in Afghanistan, how would you characterize the Iranian influence in Afghanistan and what you see as Iran's role in Afghanistan?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. I think not only Pakistan, but Iran also, all of our neighbor. I mean, USSR was our neighbor in the north. The big brother, actually, we were calling them. The Islamization in Pakistan and also the Islamization or the Islamic Revolution in Iran was also part of the building green belt in the region to stop the USSR advancement. Unfortunately, we are stuck in a lot of other policies. The Iran-US relationship have an impact on us. The American and China relationship have an impact on us. The American and Russia relationship has an impact on us. So it's not only, they also played a very, very negative role. They also use religion as a tool to control the people. So there's no difference. But we're trying. It was interesting because I told one of the Iranian ambassador, I said, for God's sake, don't use us against the American. Mm. He looked at me, like, how naive you are. No, Dr. Samar, we are not doing this. And I said, well, it's so, because I was running schools in the central part of Afghanistan. Once one of the ambassadors said, where are you from? I said, I'm from a district where I didn't allow you to have influence. So I'm the one, because I'm saying that the importance of education, as soon as I started schools, formal schools, and Jowhari and 3 districts in Ghazni. Actually, I had a limited fund, which was given by the Norwegians. And the other madrasas were really closed. But people doesn't have alternative. That's why we had not maybe what the Ministry of Education was saying, 9 million children, but at least we had 6 million to 7 million children in the school. But we were all defeated. I keep saying that it's a collective failure. It's a collective failure, Afghanistan. We were all defeated by maybe 100,000 gunmen. Yes, please.
We have a student.
Yeah, my question is about, so right now, what does women's rights advocacy look like in Afghanistan? Because we've heard, over the past few months, so many advocates have had to go into exile, and so they're not in the country anymore. So what are there active women's rights groups in Afghanistan, and what are some specific ways that we could support them or advocate for them?
Well, there is a lot of activists who are out, but we were not the only one. It's millions of girls who gone to and got education. They are fighting for their rights and for equality. And I think the problem was the whole issue, the whole program was so quickly that we were not able to organize ourselves, and everybody is in shock. I think time passing and surviving from the actual shock, there might be a proper networking and a proper group of resistance, more organized group of resistance. And yes, the girls who are standing on the street every day and walking without their black hijab, which is not our culture, again, is a sign of those resistance. The ones who are outside, like me, I mean, we are advocating here, but the main job is done by the one who really over there putting themselves at risk and calling and asking for their rights.
And I think the follow-up question to that is there any way that students over here, women activists, feminists here, can know about how to access those pages, those social media, so they can boost them? How can it? And maybe that's something you can tell me about or the Baker Center about, and then they could then help get that information out. That might be helpful.
Yes, I think it's a lot in the YouTube. It's a lot in the Facebook. If you Google, it's a lot of information about the activities over there.
The Baker Center will get that information and share it out with the audience here, people who are here today. We'll take our last question.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Samar. Thank you for your presentation and for being here. A very basic question: how are Americans and the United States viewed in Afghanistan for the 20 years that we were there and then our very sudden departure?
Yep. It's very honest and frank what the people tell me, I'm telling you. People were really very friendly with Americans. The hatred started with some of the civilian casualties and some of acts of a really violent act, I have to say. Like soldiers get out in the middle of the night and go to the village and kill the people when they are sleeping. That was the case in Kandahar. And there was the civilian casualties and bombing in Herat, killing of the other civilians with the nitrate and so on, was used as a reason to promote the people and some of the villages who were affected badly by Taliban, of course, and by other countries who wants to make those issues use as a political propaganda. But the departure had a very, very negative impact. I give you an example. the person who was the national security advisor when they signed the agreement between Afghanistan, the security agreement between Afghanistan and the US, he said, I really regret to believe and trust the Americans. And I think that is used widely by people even in Pakistan and Iranian not using very much because they had the Shah experience also. It's very unfortunate. I think that was really, I said that democracy, I think, should come from the people rather than by outside force. Outside force always can facilitate and give the tool for the people to be empowered and believe on democracy. I think it did damage the reputation, at least among the Afghans.
Thank you, Dr. Samar.
Thank you.
Dr. Samar, I'll take off my mask. Dr. Samar, it was such a pleasure to have you here tonight. Thank you so much for giving us your time and your expertise, and also your willingness and bravery to share your personal experiences with us as well. Thank you so much, and for giving us ways to think about paths forward for protecting women's rights in Afghanistan, but also universally. I think your message about education is one that's important for women, for men, for everyone globally, right, and not just in Afghanistan. And Sehba, thank you so much for moderating such a critical and timely discussion. If I might take just a moment, I'm sorry to do a few more thank yous. I do want to, in addition to our esteemed speaker and moderator, also thank Anna Martin-Gill, our program coordinator at the Center for the Middle East, for all her work in realizing this event, as well as Ambassador and Mrs. Durjian for their support of bringing Dr. Samar here to the Baker Institute this evening, our wonderful events and AV team who facilitated everything, and of course all of you, our audience members and supporters who make it possible to hold these kind of critical conversations like this one tonight. And just as a reminder, the Women's Rights, Human Rights, and Refugees program will be hosting a second event on April 28th. That event will focus primarily on Afghan refugees, especially those who have come to the US and also those who have come specifically to Houston. And it'll be a panel discussion with a number of really knowledgeable speakers. So we hope you'll also consider joining us for that event as well. And you can RSVP on the Baker Institute website. So thank you again, Dr. Sima Samar and Sehba, for we wishing everyone a wonderful rest of your evening. We hope we'll see you also in April. Thank you.